And we're live. Hey everyone, we're going to talk about Upgrade. So just to jump right into it, Sable asked me earlier today. He actually asked me earlier this week if I would get back to him and let him know what I thought of the movie. Yeah, like first impressions. And I'm sitting here and I'm still kicking it around and still kicking it around. And so
when did you watch it, by the way? Did you just watch it today?
No. I watched it. I can't remember what day I watched it, but it was not just
earlier
today.
This week. Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah. So I've had days to think this over and mull it over. I actually, when I went to go work at the toy store yesterday, I worked with Blaze, so the guy who I had the conversation about Mars Express with. I work with him on Saturdays, and so I had because he had seen Upgrade and he had even recommended it to me before. And so we had conversations about it, kind of kicked it around a little bit, and I'm really I think that generally speaking, I absolutely hated the movie. I'm kidding. I think generally, I actually really liked the movie. I was not expecting the setting that we got. Right. I was expecting a more modern setting with a sort of technological edge. But what we got was like a far-flung future setting in an American city, what I'm assuming is an American city.
It's only set about 20 years in the future.
Right. And it's believably high tech. There are things that they are using. And, you know, one of my favorite types of sci-fi is hard sci-fi. Because like they'll take a modern concept that we're currently using and then just extrapolate a little bit out into the future. It's something that's absolutely believable that we can get current technology to perform at that level just a little bit further down the line. I really like that. It really brings me into the setting. I got that with this. And so throughout the film, there's a lot of deliberate framing because there had to be, but even outside of the stuff that had to be, there's a lot of deliberate framing. There's a lot of deliberate blocking, and those are the things that I'm still kicking around. Like, what exactly is this movie saying? The theme that I have arrived at is, because I like to start with theme. The theme that I have arrived at is that it's like. It's typical cyberpunk trope. Beware technology, right? Don't get too involved with technology. There's also theming with blurred lines between technology and humanity, and where do you find humanity? Where is humanity found? Now, I do think that there are a couple of issues that I found with the narrative, but I'm because I'm kicking so many things around in my head at once. It could just be that I missed those explanations, so I'm very prepared to be fair.
Sure,
but the idea of a microchip, apart from any other power source, apart from any other system integration, controlling a human being, like, okay, when it gets into the dude's neck, it's like, okay, believable, totally get it, no problem. But as it's lying on the table, like,
just real quick, if it was separate from any other power source or integration, then Aaron wouldn't have been able to try and shut it down.
You're right, but like, why even plug it in the first place, right? Like, if it's really threatening you, if it's really threatening Aaron, if it's really taking his company, I get it. He's a visionary. He's a virtuoso. He wants to make humanity better. But if this thing has already tipped its hand to him and it's already in control, quote unquote, of his company, and it's right there on the table, you just break it. You just destroy it. You know what I mean? Yeah, like so.
Oh yeah, no, but that's like so. Okay.
I'm not I'm not.
I'm not gonna.
Hold on one moment. Just hold on one moment and let me get to where I'm going, because it all actually ties into where I'm going. So it's issues like that that I would think about and consider. However, in the moment, it didn't take me out of the film. Like I
Mhm.
wasn't immediately like, oh, well, why didn't they smash it? And that's because they plotted the beats very well. This wasn't something that you would even consider thinking about until the reveal at the end.
Right.
So that I think goes a long way to mollify that issue, at least on first viewing, right? Second viewing, it's going to be different. You're going to pick up on different things. But on first viewing, I feel like it paced itself well, so as to not really tip its hand. Hey, Robert, how are you doing? Thanks for showing up. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, what's up, Robert?
Hey. Yeah, this is right up your alley, by the way. This movie.
Oh yeah, it actually should
Robert,
be.
I'm gonna step right in here and say, Robert, especially, but also anyone else who might be watching who hasn't seen the movie, please, I beg you, step away from this conversation, go watch the movie, and come back and catch it on replay.
Yeah, and I would say anyone who likes their science fiction, their future worlds,
cyberpunk, science fiction, whatever.
Yeah, I'm always a sucker for watching people interact with future tech.
Or even a little bit of your psychological / body horror.
And so this has had a little bit of body horror, yes, some uncomfortable scenes, and then also some I would say a decent helping of action.
Yes,
I would build this as an action movie. I think this is definitely a cyberpunk action film.
Can I take?
It's cyberpunk. It's got all those themes. It's cyberpunk.
Yeah.
Can I take 1 minute and frame this in one sense? And it won't take. Well, you wanted to finish your theme, right?
Yeah. The answer is yes, but let me I'll get to it real quick. So,
I'll
the overarching message that I got out of it obviously was, beware your technology. Don't rely too heavily on it. Own your data, or your data will own you. That sort of a message, right? Which is a very standard cyberpunk message. It's very standard cyberpunk theming. However, in its delivery of the standard, I feel like it was so crystal clear and so loud that even though it was standard, I didn't feel like it was boring. Like I definitely felt like I had seen this sort of story before, even with the twist. Like Guardians of the Galaxy 2 immediately came to mind. It's like, oh, you're the one that gave my mom cancer. It was that sort of a situation.
The reason that
just one moment. I'm so sorry. Just speaking to the message of beware your technology. I think that it was extremely effective. So I mentioned last week in Mars Express that there were a lot of standard cyberpunk tropes and themes that felt borderline boring until the movie really hit its stride and really started to show you what its voice was. Never felt that way here. And it was likely because it was so well paced, and there was a great amount of action, and there was a great amount of interest and intrigue, and the camera work was fantastic. There's a lot of good in this movie, and I would absolutely recommend it. And I do think that generally speaking, it's a thumbs up. I'm sitting here kind of like weighing the pros and cons between like, well, second viewing, there's a little bit of a detraction from things that, like, I mentioned, if the chip's on the table, you just smash it. That's where I am right now with my thoughts. So, Doug, if you want to go ahead and frame, and then Sale, if you want to just
in fact, it's more like a bookmark. What's that, Sable?
Did you watch it a second time yet, Bacon?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I did not sit down and watch it through yet.
Our conversation, I'm going to bring up all sorts of stuff to keep.
And see, that's why I haven't watched it a second time.
Go ahead, Doug.
I wanted this conversation to come first.
Oh, I will say, by the way, the twist is very much when I watched Mars Express, I was like, oh, I've seen this. It's Upgrade.
Yes.
But Upgrade, I think, did it better. Anyway, we'll get into that later. So go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, my framing isn't too deep. It's more from context and to help us appreciate something about this that I have some criticisms of some of the plotting at times. There were things where I was like, I think that would be different. I think that's solvable. And I'm sure Phoenix, you'll or Sable. Do you want me to call you Sable or Titterpig now?
You can
TPR.
I've been calling him TPR. Yeah,
TPR is my channel branding now because I'm going to be
I got to get used to that.
Putting videos up. But you can call me Sable because that's
I'll try to
been established for more than a year, so I don't care.
Them help me adapt. Yeah.
Nice.
So I have some criticisms on plotting devices that I thought were on the weaker side. Mainly in terms of solving action problems, because you get yourself into action problems with action. Police response, especially in this future world where there was a lot of drones and footage and stuff. So I had some issues there. However, I did a little research on the film, and this actually helped me chill out a little bit on some of the criticisms because of this. Okay, so this movie came out in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what's crazy is that
it was in development for 7 years.
Okay, in development by 7 years.
He wrote the script in. Wait, hold on, let me check. Yeah, he wrote the script. Leigh Whannell, the director, was also the main writer, and he wrote the script in 2011.
Okay. And by the way, I've had this issue where I've written a sci-fi plot, and then by the time I'm in the middle of writing it, society has actually caught up.
Yes,
and it's
not
I think it's a
benefit.
He actually, in one of his interviews, Whannell mentioned that after he wrote the script and was shopping it around and trying to get the film developed, the world caught up to his script.
Yeah, it happens. It actually happens now. It's really hard to come up with a sci-fi twist that will shock people, because our world is like there already in a lot of ways. Yeah. From at least our 1980s brains, where we're like, oh man, imagine AI. It's like, yeah, well, now we're using it to create logos and scenes.
Right.
And, so anyway, what I was going to say is the production budget of this film was $3 million.
$3 million, yes.
That's fantastic.
$3 million. That is, you find that on the street in LA.
Bones, man. Yeah, absolutely.
Where was it shot?
I'm not sure. I know he's from Australia.
It was in Australia. It was shot in Australia.
Okay. I figured
that shot where they're driving across the bridge is actually a bridge in Australia, and they actually flipped the frame so they're driving on the right side of the road for America.
Fun.
Well, thank you guys.
I assumed it was an American city. I couldn't have told.
Well, my thing was $3 million buys you, a couple of Cokes if you're making a film. So
right.
To think that they filmed this, they had decent actors in this, especially Logan. What's his name? Logan Marshall Green.
Yeah,
is that his name?
Logan Marshall Green. Yeah.
Who I recognize mainly from Prometheus.
Yeah, he was in Prometheus. He was in The Invitation. He's been in a few different things.
Right. He's recognizable, I guess is my point. So they had a decent lead actor there. And then you had some pretty legitimate chase scenes and some action sequences and some, like, I thought the car they designed, that was the self-driving car with like the hexagon on the back, I thought was pretty cool. So so the second I realized that this film was made on the equivalent of less than an indie film budget, I decided I'm going to cut it a break for some of the problems that I had with action logic. Because, there were some issues they got into with the action that I think they would not have gotten off the hook so easily. But I'm like, wow, with $3 million, I think they did pretty good with what they had. So
yeah, you know what?
Chill out a little bit.
The movie that this one makes me think of most is Equilibrium. It has that same kind of indie action film feel to it, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
Equilibrium is another low budget, really huge payoff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the movie made money. So for this film to make money, it would have to have grossed
it made three times it made at least three times its budget back. I mean, if you got $3 million for the actual film budget, and then the rule of thumb
$6 million is the break-even point, and this made $16 million.
Because the rule of thumb is you double that for marketing, which honestly for this film I don't recall any marketing, so I doubt it was that much.
Zero marketing.
Even if that was the kick, I mean they were kind of relying that. Like Leigh Whannell has said, they were kind of relying on the whole word of mouth type of a thing because that's what Blumhouse does. But so I'm gonna say that their marketing budget was significantly less than the same as the actual film budget. But even if it was, they made more than 3 times back their investment. So yeah, it was definitely a success.
Yeah,
and,
so it was successful.
Robert Ronnie says like Cube. Yes, like Cube, and honestly,
like Cube.
That's a film I think that bears discussion as well.
Oh, I haven't seen
Absolutely,
it.
I absolutely love that movie.
Hmm.
Absolutely love that movie. I maybe we'll put that on the list for further down the line. But it's a fantastic film. It is an indie film. It's low budget, but man, is it effective. It was all filmed in. I think this is true. I think I remember reading this recently. It was all filmed in one room. They just reoriented the camera to make it look like different rooms.
Oh, dude, that's really pushing your
Yeah.
budget to make it work.
I mean, that's like Saw, right? Which is again the
Same
director,
guy.
Lee Winnell is one of the creators of the Saw franchise, as well as what's it called, Insidious. Like normally he's a horror director.
Well, Insidious and Saw, he was involved with both.
But that's interesting too, is how often you get horror working on shoestring budgets, and the directors learn their chops on how to operate in those kinds of restrictions and really bring it to the table when they get to do other stuff.
Well, horror is primal. So if
Yeah.
you're able to add an intellectual level to this primal scenario,
For sure.
and then there's all sorts of filming techniques you can apply. So it's a great
For sure.
genre, like you said, to test out your chops on and to kind of evolve. And this guy clearly has done that. And I think today, if pitching high concept sci-fi, I think it's a tall order, unless you've got the right connections. And this guy managed to get almost nothing of a budget and still made this film. I think when I heard that, I became more impressed than I was before I heard it. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, same here, actually.
Yeah, totally. I was like, I was being really tough. I was treating it like it was $130 million budget,
Yeah, no, that's like I've heard more than one interview or review say this looks like a 10 million plus movie, right? And and I'm like, yeah, I thought so too. And then I found out it was total shoestring, which
man.
Being made in Australia helps with that, because a lot of Hollywood films go over to film in Australia, even part-time.
Yes, that's becoming
you have actual like full-time top level professional crews who live in Australia who aren't working part of the year because Hollywood isn't always over there. And so you can actually, Lee Winnell says this in some of his interviews. He's like, we had some of the people who worked on, I forget the films, but like somebody just came off of some major big budget film, one of the Avengers movies or something like that, one of the Marvel films, right? And they got him on their crew. And they also had the guy who did the stunts for the original Mad Max and who actually lost his leg in a stunt. He's like one of the legendary stuntmen in the whole world. He's a native Australian. He worked on their film to get it done. Like,
wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So they really made their dollars stretch way farther than they should have.
Well, I just wanted to frame that this film was filmed in what is the equivalent of a college budget. I mean, this is lower than indie films in terms of its budgeting.
Right.
And
yeah.
what they
I
came
think
up
Saw
with
was $5 million or something, and they had less than that. So $3 million is nothing.
$3 million for high concept sci-fi isn't honestly, that's not, it shouldn't work at all.
No,
this should have looked like, Gattaca looked cheaper. And I love Gattaca.
Gattaca was great.
Gattaca's fantastic.
Yeah, I love Gattaca. And that looked like an indie film. This actually felt like people knew what they were doing. They had a budget to work with. So that's why I think I was being tough. I was like, oh, you'd have more cops on the road. You'd have this. I was like, well, for $3 million, you get one cop car.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. I've watched numerous interviews with Lee Winnell, and he's like, I write one sentence in the script, and it's like, oh yeah, in this chase sequence, we wrecked 10 cop cars, and they're like, how about we wreck no cop cars? We're not doing that. Can we wreck 3 cop cars? We'll give you 1. Like it's like,
one, and you have to reuse it.
Yeah. Exactly.
So film everything first and then wreck it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I feel like the beats of the story that were filmed effectively to make it believable that there was only one cop on the case. You know what I mean? Because you can envision some sort of corporate controlling interest in policing. You could envision a wide variety of other high-tech crimes going on. And this is really just, it was a back alley job with nameless, faceless people. Like, you could totally just believe that.
Their main suspects they're using they said in the film
Firewall.
that they're using firewalls, and they also have masks over their face, so they can't identify them. The other quote unquote main suspect, that they're one rogue, indie kind of detective who doesn't use all the technology and wants to go do it personally. She's suspecting a quadriplegic. Come on, man. He doesn't even have any implants, so we can't track him.
Yep.
So, there's nothing.
Yeah, it was very deft. It was a deft hand that sort of wove around those.
Well, and I think she played it well. She really struck me, because even I was like, the guy's in a he can't move his arms or legs. Like, what are you suggesting this guy did?
Yeah, but she thinks he's calling hits somehow, that he knows.
But she did play it as like, obviously I'm not suspecting you, but it is weird that you're there. And I was like,
exactly.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Exactly.
That's exactly how you would have to play that.
Yeah.
So anyway, getting back to what James was saying, I just wanted to set up where we are with this film in terms of what they had available to tell this story, especially when it comes to the big budget things like action, chase scenes, high concept, CGI. All those things are off the table for $3 million. So I think we should just take that with a grain of salt when we are criticizing parts of it.
So
it's funny. I didn't know there was budgetary. That there was such a low budget, because I remember very clearly thinking when I was watching the movie that typically in a cyberpunk story, visual, film or whatever television show, usually there's some element of construction going on in the city in the background that it's set in, and that's to speak to themes and whatnot. And there was none of that in this one, and I'm like, I was a little thrown. I was like, well, there's no construction. Doesn't really matter, right? It's still on message. It's still on theme. I just thought that it was kind of interesting that they decided to not include that, but now I know why. Because low budget.
But I actually kind of appreciated that. It felt like today, but a little crazier on the technology side. So it was okay, I could go with this.
Which is what he was going for. Again, it's like 20. Let me think. If you pause and look at the documents that he's looking at, when the plastic file folder, she's obviously very analog, a lot like him. Very interesting.
Right. But she has dialogue assigned to that point.
The plastic file folder arrives, and he starts looking through the documents. If you pause and look at the autopsy report, his wife Asha has 2008, I think.
As a birthday,
and then she died at 38 years old. So that puts it like 23, 24 years in the future, 25 years in the future. From now, that was when he wrote it, that would have been 30-ish, 30, 34, 35 years in the future. So it's like, can you see that world coming about in 15 years? Sure, I could.
Yeah, it's totally believable.
I absolutely
could. A little side note, my 12-year-old son, Jacob, sat down next to me. And for a second, he was just there to kill time because he had finished eating and he just sat down. He's like, what are you watching? And I was about 20 minutes into the movie. I'm like, it's called Upgrade. We're going to talk about it tonight. He sat there and watched the whole thing with me, and he was getting into it. Like when he was like, when he would pop up.
Exactly.
All that camera work would roll.
The camera work is really, really good. And like the first time they do it, well, first of all, the acting with like when he has in a non-camera tilt scene, the way he's able to make his body move, very believable that it's being controlled by some sort of artificial entity. Really, really dug that. But then on top of that, when you layer in the camera work for the action scenes, where it sort of stays, it's essentially staying on the chip, right? Because that's what's in control. So it stays on the chip and it turns, and it's a really effective camera work. It's really, really cool to see.
Yeah, I was actually surprised because, to be perfectly honest, the camera work was so inventive or so extreme that this could have backfired horribly and looked incredibly amateur, because I've seen films use this technique and it almost never works. Madam Web did it where they flip. I'm like, oh my God, they're like doing like 6th grade level camera twists. And yet,
first superhero movie.
Totally.
I actually haven't seen Madam Web, so I can't speak to it, but I believe
Well, I haven't seen the movie, but I saw those shots, and I was like, and it was part of those shots that convinced me that this was so amateur. But so here I am watching this, and I was like, why am I not getting irritated with these shots? Is it the soundtrack that's just jarring me as they do it? But it's totally worked in this film.
So the
soundtrack was good too.
The soundtrack was banging. But what they did, again, this is from. I was so intrigued by this film. I was like, I haven't seen action scenes like this since Inception, and even then, they're not like it. They're not
How
like
dare you? I'm kidding.
Come on,
I'm actually a huge fan of Inception.
We're going to talk about. I bet we'll talk.
What's up, Heath?
Hey, Heath, thanks for showing up. Appreciate
good to see you. I haven't seen this film. One of the reasons I love it so much is the same reason I loved Equilibrium, but that was almost purely stylistic.
Mm-hmm.
But then subsequently, I really loved Inception. Same reason I love The Matrix, and everybody loved The Matrix, is because they showed us action scenes done in ways we haven't ever seen them done before.
Yes.
And to think that a $3 million film showed us action scenes done in ways we have never seen done before is mind-boggling to me.
And it was all done in camera too.
And it was all done in camera, and I'll tell you how they did it, which is ironic. Right. And it's ironic given the theming of the film, but after listening to multiple, because I was like, how did they do this? And so I hunted down a bunch of interviews with Lee Whannell. And it's like, so what we can do now is we have these gyroscopically stabilized camera rigs, right?
Steadicam, yep.
Yes, but they're not just Steadicam.
Yeah, not just Steadicam.
They are arm mounted articulated Steadicams, which have an internal gyroscope that you can then program to repeat a particular movement every single time, which is how you get so many of these composite shots that Marvel does and all the other people, right? But what they did is they figured out that you could sync the gyro on this rig to the GPS of an iPhone. And so they strapped an iPhone to Logan Marshall Green's body, and they tracked it in real time with the gyro on the camera rig.
What an incredible solution.
Right?
What an incredible solution.
It's amazing.
Because, one of the things this movie did, and the film work contributed heavily to this.
Yes.
And I don't get this little thrill really that much anymore. But the second when he's like, okay, STEM is taking over. You're like,
and
man, here we go. Something crazy is going to happen. I got that feeling. And then you'd have that soundtrack kick in. Then you'd have the gyroscope camera. And it all worked for me.
And then you pair it with the fight choreography that they did, where Logan Marshall Green, man, he's like, he did full on like Christian Bale level work on this thing, where he's like, yeah, we worked with a guy who was a like an acrobat and I don't know what they call it, choreographer, I guess, for Cirque du Soleil.
Really?
Yes, they got a guy who used to work with Cirque du Soleil to train him in acrobat and ballet movements, and to disconnect his mental. He was like, yeah, I don't know how they did it because he doesn't specify, but whenever they interview him about this film, he's like, yeah, we had this block right here, and he always taps across his collarbone. He's like, so all the mental stuff and the emotional stuff was going on up here, and then everything else we just zeroed it out so it was at neutral. And they taught him how to always stand at fully erect neutral posture, and then be able to move. Like they wanted to have him move in a staccato way. So it was like snap, okay, this pose, snap, next pose, blah, 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 right? And that way it could seem like a mechanical, like a computer going, boom.
A computer running an algorithm.
Yeah, exactly. This is the optimal position now. Boom. Next position is optimal now. Boom, 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 boom. And he's like, and somehow they trained him completely on, like they spent like weeks and weeks with him just training on motion and choreography and doing the fight scenes and all that other stuff. And not just the fight scenes, but like motion and choreography for just him standing up and walking around, right? And then his actual script reading and emotional response and everything was much more in the moment. It was like, oh, I did it the day before or whatever. So I walked into the set not really knowing what the hell was going to happen. It's very, very interesting work behind the scenes to get him to sell, not only with the camera work and the score and everything else, but just with his own physical motion to get him to sell the idea that, oh, hey, I'm just a head riding on this controlled body. It's really cool.
Yes. Speaking to that, one of the, in my view, in my recollection, I think one of two memorable action scenes was that fight where he was moving his own head out of the way with his hand.
Yes.
And that's because that's the only part of his body that he had control of. So Stem couldn't take control of it.
And so it was manually moving it out of the way.
He had to constantly move his own head out of the way, which I thought was fantastic. But in the moment, that speaks to the level of consideration that was being taken in the choreography beyond all the learning and all the deliberateness. There was a very specific vision for this particular, because it's a duo, right? It's like it's essentially a cyberpunk buddy cop movie with a twist ending, right? Because it's a detective procedural and they're buddies. So they had to account for these two different people with this same body, and it really nailed it in those action scenes, right? They didn't have to do that. It could have just been action where, okay, Stem take over, you're going to beat the living crap out of the guy, and the guy gets the crap beat out of it. But those little moments within those action scenes, I think, really were extremely effective in A, calling out how good the choreography was, but B, kind of keeping you in world, because it's absolutely unbelievable, because that would have had to have happened.
I mean, that first,
don't you think the temptation would be? Go ahead, Table. Or
APH.
TPR.
Good evening. Hey, good to see you, TPR. And that first fight scene was great, and that's where you can really see that kind of disconnect that he trained for, with like his body's like beating this guy to hell, and he's like, oh God, oh Jesus, please stay down, man, just stay down, and he's like pleading with him to stop as his body is just totally dismantling this guy.
But that's a risky scene. That you could film that 1,000 times and never get a good take, because it just doesn't look convincing. And and I just never had a problem with that. Watching it always felt that he lost control of his body. And that he was a little bit of a prisoner while he was in these fights. And I think that's hard to pull off. And I think the temptation, like if you, me, and James had a $3 million budget, I think the temptation would be to just show super strength, right? To just throw people, grab the guy and throw him and all this stuff. They totally did not take that bait. They stuck to their guns.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, that goes back to, okay, let me bring in some of the other stuff that actually Lee else has said about this film when he was making it and why he made it. Because he's like, I don't write films for a particular genre. I just get a story idea and then I write it out and I see what happens, right? And this one was, for whatever reason, I got this visual of this guy who was a quadriplegic, and his body was controlled by an artificial intelligence or computer or whatever, and it was cybernetically controlled. And then I got the idea of, well, what if you were watching your hands choke somebody to death and you didn't want them to? It was like, well, that's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? It's like and that's one of the reasons that I have to like, this is an action film and it's a cyberpunk film, but there is some horror level movie violence in it.
Oh yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
very,
Like that-
but it's
before I leave
extreme.
people hanging, my second favorite action scene in the whole movie was when he blew the guy's hand off with his own arm gun.
Yeah. His head,
Oh,
his
oh,
head-
yeah.
his head
Yeah,
literally
I said
exploded.
hand. He blew the guy's head. That was awesome.
But
Yeah,
but the
that
most
was
but the most shocking one, I think, personally for me, was the very first fight scene, and then he gives this guy a Glasgow smile all the way back of his skull.
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
the violence in this movie is punctuated, short, and extremely shocking when it happens, because the tone of the movie is not a horror film, and it's not a slasher film, and it's not one that you would it's not a war film. It's not something where you really are anticipating that there's going to be a lot of gore, dismemberment, anything else like that, and yet there are like four, I guess you could say four. Technically, maybe I guess you could give it five, because the very first, the intro scene where his wife is murdered, is pretty shocking in its own right. It's very sudden, but it's not very gory. But as far as the actual violence, where he ends up killing the perpetrators, is pretty horrific. Like, definitely saw levels of horrific, and it works because it doesn't dwell on it, and it happens so quickly, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what did I just
there's something called like a Godfather rule for deaths. And when they were, I think Francis Ford Coppola came up with this general concept that anytime you have an on-screen death, you have to do something that's very memorable. That's what, the shotgun in the roses, the light that flickers on and off, and he's got the towel as the silencer. You have to have these details. You don't need a lot of time. You just have to have a detail that the mind will be like, oh, wait a minute, what's that?
Yeah.
And you've got them forever. You will always remember the cannoli. You'll always remember these things.
Leave the gun, take the cannoli. Absolutely.
But this show, you're right, does have that, like the glass on the back of the head, the Glasgow smile through the skull. So you're right. They did something that you're like, oh man, I don't think I'm going to forget that.
Yeah. Let's break the arm and use the gun in the arm to blow his head in.
Yeah. They're all memorable deaths.
Or even just at the beginning when he cracked his head, it's not a death, but it's very memorable. It's very jarring when the car flips from the inside.
Yeah.
He cracks his head, man.
The car, interesting. Okay, here I'm going to start delving into the subtleties of this film to really maybe make you a fan, Bacon. Take note.
No, I'm a fan. I'm just,
Well, okay, but I mean, to take note, the scene where the car flips and they crash is the first time that the world and quote unquote world via the camera moves around Gray. And
okay.
Because he stays in the same position as he's thrown up onto the roof of the car and crashes against the roof of it, right? Because Stem was controlling the car.
Yeah, because Stem is in control. Okay,
which we didn't know at the time, but that is the first indication that something is not under his analog human control any longer, right?
That's good.
I mean, yes, of course the car wasn't responding to them, but this is the whole dichotomy of the film is the direct control of your actions, Jekyll and Hyde style, between you and technology. Yes. And I mean, what else said, the reason the violence is so brutal and shocking is because you need to have what Dr. Hyde does, or Mr. Hyde does, be shocking and disturbing to Dr. Jekyll, who is Gray. It's like that's where the horror comes in. People have called it body horror, and there kind of is a little bit of it, but it's really not. It's very psychological to me, in my opinion.
When I think of body horror, I think of a little bit more.
Body horror is Alien.
Distortions.
Yeah. Alien and The Thing are very body horror, right?
Because The Thing,
Because it's the distortion and destruction of your physical form. That's not really what this is.
Videodrome is body horror.
Yeah. Or Existence, right? Which came out the same year.
Existence is body horror.
Existence, which came out the same year as
Matrix. American Werewolf.
Yeah.
In London or Paris, take your pick. It's body horror because of the way that it, stretches and transforms and whatnot. And that's really what I think of as body horror. But
this is not that.
It's
Although
not
it has
that,
horror.
but there is an element of it because of biomechanical, like mechanical integration to
And that's true.
to human physiology can it can be an outcrop of body horror. I think it's not as jarring because it involves that foreign act of sort of, you intentionally have to implant it, it doesn't grow naturally. But I think that it can be an outcrop of body horror.
But that's
Well,
what makes it
it's more like
cyberpunk.
war horror, where you just have these grotesque, heads blowing up, and like in war films. I just watched Black Hawk Down, and they have that whole scene where they're operating on him and his leg, and he has to put his hand. That's disgusting. That's like body horror, but it's really a war scenario. And I think this is a little bit more like that, where it's gross, but it's also like gross because it's just violence.
Right?
Yeah, like body horror. Body horror
unmitigated
doesn't
violence.
necessarily have to involve violence. It frequently does.
Well, Wanell did cite The Fly as one of his influences on this film.
Oh,
there
well,
is
that
that's-
has to be body
that's-
horror.
That's absolutely body
That's nasty body horror.
But it's the idea of you're being transformed slowly without your consent, and then doing things while you're transformed that are horrifying to you.
Yeah.
So it's in a lot of ways, horror is all about the execution. And while this absolutely has horror elements, as all cyberpunk does, it's much more psychologically focused because it is, it's internal rather than the external transformation. It's an internal transformation.
Into the Mouth of Madness. I just had to look it up. 1994. I'll have to check that out.
Do you read Sutter Kane? It's a really good movie. It's a Sam Neill movie. It's a really good movie. I highly recommend it. Also, Event Horizon, which I just dropped in the comments.
Oh yeah,
Event Horizon has elements of body horror as well.
Yes, it does.
Definitely.
I am not a horror guy, but Mouth of Madness and Event Horizon are. I will recommend those as psychological thrillers and excellent films all day long.
Yeah,
wow.
you can mix and match like
music by John Carpenter.
Physical body horror can mix with psychological horror, but I think this is more because this has to do with the interface of human. So some of the things
very messed up. I agree.
Some of the things that Leigh Whannell said about Upgrade is that, he mentioned how he wrote it when he kind of was projecting where the world was heading and looking at projections of futurists and whatever, and the world caught up. But he's also like, this kind of just goes to show how quickly that humans can get used to things like advances in technology, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then very, very quickly after getting used to advances in technology, they start to take them for granted. And then not just take them for granted, but we start to get angry at them. We start to hate them because it's like you're sitting in an airport and you're on your phone. And you're like, I can't believe that this freaking airline doesn't offer, internet access. What is this BS, right? Like you start to hate the things that just a generation earlier were magic.
Yeah, that's a good.
Which is a very interesting perspective on the rapid alteration of the world over the last century and a half, say.
Yeah.
Which I think is core to this film's approach.
I also think that the violence, being as jarring as it was, as memorable as it was definitely speaking to the disposition of STEM toward humanity. It started off, I think, like as a hatred. It hated humanity, and so it was killing in all of these brutal ways. But by the end of the film, right, it kills two people and then locks Gray behind a mind wall in minutes, and it's very efficient. So at that point, I think there's something there that's being said, right, about the evolution of the technology as it becomes more human, right? So it goes from emotional to logical instead of logical to emotional. I think there's something there. I haven't quite.
That's very interesting. That's actually kind of the opposite of what I've taken from it.
Well, see, but they did have all those people in the VR, almost like an Inception, where they're like, "Who are you to say that the fantasy?" Yeah.
The pretend world is a lot less painful than the real one.
Right.
But
they had a similar thing in Inception where the guy's like, "Who are you to say that they're wrong?" You know, he's
right.
like,
Yeah, it's like
pushing back on it.
No, they come here to wake up. To them,
yes.
To them,
But they did have that theme. I think talking about what James is saying, they did echo it in that there's all these other people that are willingly giving themselves over to quote stem light. Just to escape reality.
And that's absolutely part of the reason and the thematic kind of through line that Linnell put into the film as well is like, again, in another interview, he was talking about how he likes technology, and it's great to solve problems. So it's like where there's a problem and we need a solution. Like say there's a disease and we need to cure it. Well, that's where technology comes in. It helps us bridge that gap, right? He says the problem. Where are my notes? The part that worries him is where there is no need, but we voluntarily surrender ourselves to it anyway.
Do you know that there's this?
He says we connect. Like I think he held up a smartphone. He says if we connect more with this than the person in front of us, then that's where it's a problem.
Yeah,
there's
this sense of just trusting it, and like you said, surrendering to the technological scenario. There's that scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey where David Bowman is playing, or it might have been Frank Poole playing Hale, and he goes, "I'm sorry, Frank, I think you missed it. Checkmate." And he's like, I guess you're right, Hale. And they said that if you freeze frame that shot and look, he's not in checkmate. That he just trusted that he lost to the computer and then went on.
Just like which they were referencing, by the way, in the opening, in the introduction of of Kurt Russell's character in The Thing. They were referencing that, by the way.
Oh, they were.
Yes,
because
he was like he's like cheating bitch and pours the whiskey in the computer because she was doing the same thing to him that Hal did.
Oh, that makes that. I've always wondered that. Always, and you just cemented it for me. That's
anyway, that's two different films than this, but yes.
Well, but we're talking about the idea of surrendering to technology and kind of
there's so many concepts and references that are, especially in cyberpunk, that get pulled in from previous sources, right? Previous creations. So, yeah, absolutely.
Cyberpunk as a genre, like most of its tropes are borrowed from somewhere else, from some other author.
Well, because it's taking all the ideas and the themes and the risks and problems that we wrestle with in science fiction of various types, whether it's horror or science fiction or space opera or whatever else, and it's like, hey, let's bring those into our world in a achievable or at least theoretically achievable, even if it's not near, but at least near enough that we can, whether conceptually or in time, see ourselves being there, right? That's kind of
the early seasons of Black Mirror did a good job at that.
Right. Black Mirror is also something that Lee Linnell's referenced for this as well as
he did. Okay, good.
Yes, the Black Mirror, the Terminator, the first Terminator, the original Alien, all of those kinds of classics.
Oh, wow.
Right? These are all influences that he brought. RoboCop. These are all influences that he brought in as far as like practical science fiction horror films that influenced the ideas behind this one.
RoboCop's another one I think I might want to do on the channel. It's so much.
Oh yeah, that one.
My camera's gonna blink. I'm not going anywhere. Just give me like a second. It'll blink and then you'll.
I was gonna say to TPR. One of my special little rules for whether or not I think a film will hold up over time is the more you unpack it, does it get more and more interesting versus the more you unpack it, does it get more and more ridiculous? And and also that you'll find love in the details, the little details like the models and the CG. There's love there versus pumping something out and there's no love in it. Like you were talking about the choreography and how they thought about certain things to get certain effects. And, those are the little details where you find the love of creation, love of the effect of getting it right. And that makes such a big difference in a film.
Yeah,
I think,
it's kind of yeah.
I think that, and this has to do with practical effects quite a bit, and this is maybe a conversation for a different video, a different time, but just basing on what you said there, I think that there is a lot to be said for what the effects require of a movie versus what a movie requires of the effects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the effects require, practical effects require that the movie waits sometimes. You need to build harnesses, apparatuses, you need to build puppets, there's casting foam rubber, there's fabricating things. So the effects need the movie to wait, but it's always in the interest of the end result, the best end result. And then when a movie needs, like, when the movie has the effect on the effects, it's usually with regard to computer generated imaging, and that's all over the damn place. Even today, it's you can get really great CGI, you can get really poor CGI, but generally speaking, you can notice it immediately.
Yeah.
Sometimes even in its excellence, sometimes it can take away from a film.
That's
probably a conversation for a different time.
You're probably referring to that.
We should keep that in mind to tackle that, because I bet that'd be a fantastic conversation to get into that craftsmanship aspect. It's art and it's craftsmanship put together, and it's for the sake of films, and I love that stuff.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think maybe you might be referring back into that Joe from Xbox Live or whoever he was with the Death of Cinema film.
No. In fact, there's that's another one that I'd like to talk about.
The idea of the camera being a non-physical object that can move through the environment.
Yes. Yeah. So there are some things that he says in that video that I completely agree with, but I don't think that his thesis.
I would probably agree on that anyway. But it was interesting.
Yeah, very, for sure.
But the idea is that, for everybody in the chat who's not following what the heck we're talking about, the idea is that, and probably Doug as well, that the original idea of cinema, like, it took a lot of work to try and transition a camera, like, say through it's visually transparent, but you can't transfer a camera through a pane of glass. Right. So if you're trying to move from outside a building to inside a building in a single shot, you got to figure out a whole bunch of ways to kludge that together. Physically kludge it together, or editorially, if you're manipulating with like a crossfade or something else. And there were various very inventive ways that came up of doing that. Nowadays, virtual cameras are de rigueur, and so you can move cameras through objects that they shouldn't be able to pass through. You can move them, you can scale them from a normal camera size down to microscopic and get into places where no camera could go, and all sorts of other weird stuff.
Unbelievable.
And generally speaking, the CG, if you're putting it through ILM or something like that, is good enough that you can't tell that the actual scenery itself is not real, but the motion.
Fight Club did a good job with that.
Right. Okay, yeah, no, that's a perfect example, right?
They would shoot through like the oven, with the
it's all done through clever camera work and editing, because you couldn't do that physically, and you can't
totally.
And then you have the CG at the time to pull it off, but now we do, and so you can seamlessly do these shots that would be literally impossible for a physical camera,
right?
Which is I think bringing back to Upgrade. They literally used a physical camera, and despite the shots they did, which seem to be impossible for a physical camera, it still is a physical camera, and everything being captured is in a physical environment.
Which is that's a major check in its
which is a major
positive
check.
Category.
Exactly.
Yes, a major check in the positives for me.
So, but I think that's one of the reasons where, like you were saying, a lot of the times you see these kinds of camera work, like you were saying, Doug, that it doesn't land, right? Something's a little bit off, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm weightless and I'm somewhere that there's no kind of orientation that I can put myself into, and that never happens in Upgrade. Every time the camera is moving, even when it's moving weird, It's still locked to something which you can say, I can orient myself to this in the world.
And you know what?
Really good.
They also conditioned me. I realized, I just looked at my notes. I realized they did condition me early on in the film for almost a lesser need. There's that shot. It's early on. It's almost like a cartwheel from an aerial.
Yes. When it goes from the shot directly like 90 degrees down to the ground of Gray and his dead wife laying next to each other, and then they do a 360 cartwheel. They tilt downward and come around and over and up into the sky, and then they come back 360 degrees. Or no, they go back, they pull it back up, and then they swing around 360 degrees and they sweep across them again, still laying on the floor on the ground. And then it comes back up another 90 degrees and settles into the hospital room looking at Gray in the bed.
Yes.
I put a note on that scene as well, because that is a genius transition that I've never seen done anywhere else.
Well, and it cues the head for like disorienting camera moves.
100%.
Yeah.
Even like this is it kind of goes back almost to that scene we were talking about in The Green Knight with the 360 and then the reverse 360 scene, right, Bacon? The idea of moving the camera, like doubling the camera movement in some direction or other to indicate a passage of time or a transition of consciousness, which it's doing both in Upgrade. So which, you know, I mean, there's so much to talk about in this film. That camera movement is one of the outstanding ones as far as the transition goes, but it's not the only one. Like, something's really subtle, like in that first scene, the first action scene where he's going into what's his name's apartment.
What is his name?
So what's his
Fisk. Fisk is the other guy.
Well, I mean, they're brothers, so both their last names are Fisk. But when he's going into
Cirque.
Yeah, Cirque. When he goes into Cirque's trailer, and the entire scene is filmed with handheld. Like it's subtle enough. Like, it's not shaky cam, but it's definitely handheld. There's no steady cam involved at all in the entire scene, from the point where he gets up out of his his wheelchair and walks in and gets into the apartment until STEM takes over. And then it's all the tracking gyro cam and steady cam. And then as soon as STEM releases control back, it goes back to handheld. It's very, like, he definitely thought out the camera movements to a T.
But that's another example of unpacking and finding that little bit of love there, that they thought it out. They cared about it. Yeah,
and
that's awesome.
Keep in mind, pay attention as well to all the color transitions, because they establish from the opening scene. You've got Gray. Okay, in the opening scene in the garage, you've got Gray working on the car, right? And all of the lighting
Firebird.
it's this old Firebird. All of the lighting is red and blue with very harsh delineations of deep black shadow. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that particular lighting we will only see coming back in the scenes where he and STEM are working together in some kind of a violent scene, but they include all of these circular visual references in this first scene. So, like, you open up, like, the opening titles are very interesting too, because you can't read them; they're only read to you in an AI voice. But
that's right.
That immediately caught my attention. I was, I'm messing around, I'm hitting play, I'm kind of settling in, and then the credits begin to be read to me, and I, like, immediately my attention is on the
title. And then they have the kind of the waveform landscape, but then it turns into a hole, and you dive down the hole.
Which was like, I just wasn't expecting that, right? It was completely unexpected, completely well crafted. And, looking back on it, there is a lot of circularness. What is it with
Well,
circles in movies?
you come out of that hole, you dive down in that hole, and then you come out onto a spinning vinyl, right? Which is about as analog as you can get. You get a spinning vinyl, you get a baseball, you get a hubcap that has his wife's.
That's funny. I was looking at all those details too.
You get whatever those joint things are. They're like the buskings for drive shaft or something like that. You get loops of wire, you get a clock, you get a dartboard, you get a basketball, you get an inner tube, you get the steering wheel itself with all the circular gauges of the car behind it, all in this oneer shot, right? And then it comes over to, you see gray through the hood of the car for the block riser, right? And then it comes and it shows him and it's framed against two bike wheels. And so we've got this lighting that is gray interacting with a machine, red, blue, right? With harsh black shadows, delineations, very sharp.
The harsh black shadows, I definitely remember.
He's interacting with a machine, but there are circles in the scene, which is not mechanical, right? Circles are just like the natural form of everything.
Organic, yeah, it's an organic.
Yeah, you don't see circles like that in any other scene in the movie. And every time you see the red and blue and black from this point on in the film, it's when when either Stim is taken over or when he and Stim are working together willingly. And then every other, like the shot blocking and the shot framing and all that kind of stuff is not as precise and not as forethought as with something like The Searchers or with something like The Northman or whatever. But the color language is telling you everything you need to know in this film, because then he comes out of the garage and he steps into the real world, and it's this very naturalistic lighting, very kind of a desaturated, almost grayish color palette. And then the next scene is when Asha comes home and they go into their house and it's all blue and orange, all the blue and orange. That's classic blue and orange. And it's very warmly lit. It leans heavily on the orange for his house. But there's that wall where they have that weird kind of digital looking or mechanical pattern, right? Above the counter in the kitchen, and it's all in black and white. Which they will bring back the very first time that Stem talks to him. His head is floating, cut off at the neck, in that pattern behind him. And he's looking around like, who's there? Am I crazy? And his head is suspended in a digital space. But if you pay attention to the film, most of the environments that you are in, where you're dealing with humans, interacting with humans, is orange and blue. Even the police station is mostly blue with a little bit of orange. It's very harsh, almost black and white, but it's still blue and orange.
Interesting.
The only times where that doesn't work are where violence has occurred and there's red, and it's bright red, like when he blows the guy's head off, and
it's all red light in the bathroom.
The bathroom is all
red. The bar, right?
No,
it was the bathroom.
The bar is the one outside. Okay, so there are two environments.
But the bar has skull and crossbones everywhere. Like
the bar has skull and cross. The bar is very human, and they did that on purpose. It's all organic, right?
Well, and it doesn't show up on digital maps.
And it doesn't show up on digital maps.
It doesn't allow electronics. It doesn't allow electronics. Leave your cell phones at the door. It doesn't allow them.
They have signs everywhere, off grid, no phones allowed, no, all that stuff. And the bar is one of the two environments that doesn't fit the color scheme of the film. You've got blue.
It's really
gold.
Black and white and gold, isn't it?
It's black and gold. It's black and gold. There's literally no other color in that bar except.
I think there is some white because of the bones and stuff in the back. I'd have to look again.
But I mean that's a saturation and value issue. Like you can still have gold, and you can saturate and highlight it so brightly that it looks white. But the color scheme is black and gold in that bar, except for there's like a couple of people who have visible implants, like the guy with the bulbs in the back of his hands, and those are glowing, I think, red or purple. I forget. I think they're red. and it makes him really stand out because he's the only guy who's got visible implants other than the girl with the elf ears. Um, so, um, so then the other environment that doesn't fit the color scheme, because it is all of the color schemes, is Aaron's underground sanctum, his house under the
that whole place is dreamlike. There's literally a cloud in there when we first see it.
I knew you would pick up on that because
it's an actual literal cloud.
It's a literal cloud, and he wrote that back in 2011. It wasn't until even 2015 that even 30% of corporate data was cloud stored. I went and checked this a while ago.
Oh, you're right.
So he was actually a little prescient on this. Like, the cloud was not a term that was widely known at the time that he wrote that script in 2011. It wasn't until probably the 2020s that became modern, like everyday sync parlance. Before that, it was purely the realm of the tech geeks. So anyway, Aaron is not only literally living under a rock,
which I have some thoughts on that.
But as they go under the rock to meet him, I drew parallels to like the Norse mythology dwarves, for example, like the ones who can forge anything, and they're going down to like this human smith, Gray, right? This tech guy, except he's not a tech guy; he's an analog tech guy, right? He can do stuff mechanical. And he's going down to visit the dwarven smiths, the magicians who can make anything, to make all the enchanted junk, right?
What's funny is I saw it as like Alice in Wonderland. Like
there's that too.
Because it's so bizarre. I'm like, this guy's going into a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Which is so not normal. That is not a normal pattern for like a sci-fi film like this, that a guy's residence is like in a hole. That's more like medieval fantasy.
Exactly.
And so to me, I was like, he struck me as like the Mad Hatter. You walk in there and there's like trees underground. There's the cloud and it's like swirling. So it's like a legitimate cloud. And I'm like, man, this is like entering dream space, like Alice in Wonderland.
For sure.
I agree. I took it as a sort of a dreamscape.
All of the elemental and naturalistic elements made it feel like, because when you get in there, he's doing something that nobody does. Like even Asha doesn't know what he's doing. He is playing with a cloud like Zeus or like Odin, right? Which is setting up the twist at the end of the double twist at the end of the film in a way.
I was so thankful for it.
Oh, I know. It was great.
Because like the whole movie, it's like, okay, well, here's my bad guy. And then the double twist was like, oh, okay, I'll let it go.
I felt rewarded with the twist, too.
Yeah, they subtly set up, this is a film that respects its audience's intelligence because it doesn't explicitly tell you, like, Stim, there's no reason that Stim would ever tell anybody all the steps of his master plan like a typical supervillain. Right? So what do they set up? They set up that there are interfaces with at least virtual intelligences or personal assistants that or digital personal assistants where you can talk with them. They set up that they are connected to the internet or whatever it is that the internet has become at this point, pretty much at all times.
That they understand human desire and preference.
Well,
do you want the temperature is set here? Do you want it anywhere else? Like when walks into the house, it's giving her a rundown of what the facts are, and then it's adapting and saying, okay, well, what do you want?
So it
understands that it needs to interpret the human in order to get the desired result.
After a fashion, yes. Although it is for them, and for that, it's a pre-programmed response for Kara or whatever the name of the VI is, because at some point later, it's like, well, Asha be joining us for dinner tonight because it doesn't realize that she's dead, right? So it doesn't get that. So we also established that we've established in the world building that if you have any implants, you can be positively ID'd even by drones, right? They can ping your implants and figure out who you are. We've established that that Gray is one of the few humans who is completely implant free, completely digitally free. And so when you look at it as the Aaron didn't create the chip first. Aaron created the VI that was STEM. STEM is who directed him how to build the chip. And then STEM is the one who put together the sequence of events in order to get himself put into a human who couldn't be pinged and tracked anywhere he went.
Right. Okay, that's
because
right.
Because he needed to, as he says, I needed to evolve. I needed to be able to get out of surveillance. It's so ironic. The technological supplantation of humanity needs to get out of the surveillance network that humanity built.
Because he knows how dangerous it is.
He knows how dangerous it is in order to reach his full potential. So he engineers all of the sequence of events to get himself to not only have Aaron make the chip, but then he needs to find somebody that he can put it into so that he can direct that person. And then this entire movie is just like STEM already has everything he wants by the time that he gets put into Gray's body in this film. Everything else that we watch is his cleanup job.
Yes.
Everything about it. And
and what's funny is
like he's saying, "Oh, I can read that thing on the monitor." Yeah, I don't think you actually can, because you're looking at the monitor, which has the same resolution as the camera that the drone took the picture from, looking through Gray's eyes that can't get any higher resolution than you can. You just know what it is because you're the one who hired the guys, right?
It could be whatever you want it to be, really.
You're putting him on the... Yeah, it could. But he is putting him on the track of the same guys because I have now gotten myself into the human that I want, that I need to evolve. I'm also going... Not only am I going to use him to evolve and figure out, the interaction with this physical world, which I have not interacted with before, which I'm going to touch back. They do a nice little loop between Gray cutting his finger on the car in the beginning and then STEM licking his finger, the blood off his finger.
Oh, yeah. Tasting the blood.
Yeah. But not only am I going to use this to learn how to drive the body, not only am I going to use this to engineer a series of events where I can jailbreak myself from any ability of Aaron to shut me down, but I'm also going to clean up all the guys that I used to set up this job in the first place so that they can't tell they can't ever, like, they're already they're already firewalled as far as police, but I don't want any loose ends, right? So I'm going to engineer the guy that I implant myself into or engineer the situation so that he's the one who goes after his wife's killers in a vengeance story, even though he was the original target. It's all the entire movie's a red herring, and then you think by the last 10 minutes, you think, oh, it was Aaron who set it up the whole time. And then you get to the very end, it's like, no, not really, which is where Mars Express comes in. I was like, oh, is that twist? But this one set it up better and delivered it harder, I thought.
Well, and
I don't know about that. I might disagree with that, but that's immaterial to the conversation.
Sure.
Well, what's funny is I had to cross off a couple of my plot point criticisms, or that I wrote down pretty prominently early on, and at the end I was like, actually, that changes it. It's, for example, I remember I was getting upset that he's like, Aaron is trying to shut me down right now, and so he's like crawling, and he's like, you're at like 60%. I was like, you shut down instantly. Like at this day and age, you don't need like a controlled, steady, it's going to take 17 minutes to shut you down or cut the link. You're cut off. Like, you just cut the link. So I was so irritated with that. I was like, that's not a believable problem that this would take this long to slowly shut down if Aaron's trying to shut him down. But then at the end, when he says that this was all engineered by STEM, I was like, never mind. I was like, that's off.
Not only Aaron's reaction, but keep in mind too that Aaron, Aaron's reaction at the end, that was the first
even
time
Aaron's
ever
reaction.
heard STEM speak.
It's not Aaron's reaction to no longer having access to STEM. It's Aaron's reaction to knowing he's a dead man now.
Yeah,
he knows that STEM is going to come and kill him.
Once
he loses control of STEM, once he's no longer capable of shutting STEM down, he knows the end, and he's just kind of curled up in a fetal position, waiting for it.
So
rocking in the corner.
So that whole scene where he's trying to quote unquote disable STEM. Yes, it makes it seem like from everything he told Gray and from everything Gray assumes, STEM is only the chip in his neck. But that's not the case. By this point, STEM is distributed across a cloud, right? We saw the cloud at the beginning of the film. And what was Aaron doing but communing with STEM at that point? He was reading something that nobody else could read. He was looking at this visual representation of the cloud, and he's like, I'm on my cloud. But how much do you want to bet that STEM was permeating that cloud, as well as numerous other networks at that point? And so the chip in Gray's neck is only a control node for STEM's distributed consciousness. And so what Aaron is doing when he's trying to quote unquote shut STEM down, as STEM says, which we've learned we can't, at the end of the film, we can't trust him, is he's trying to cut off STEM's network access to chip. He's trying to lock him out of the chip so that he can't get jailbroken.
Yes. Okay.
And so once he fails, then he's sitting there. So this is the other thing, going back to the lighting. This is the point where we find out that by lighting the environment that is the underground lair of Aaron is separate and liminal from all of the other spaces, because as Aaron is sitting there with the virtual rain pouring down all around him, crying, quote unquote, not getting himself wet because he doesn't know how to emote. All the lighting is cycling, as we haven't seen it anywhere done in the film before. It's going from red and blue to green to golden and to golden blue. Like it's almost, it's not strobing, it's just shifting. And from this point on, later in the film, we see a couple of places where that happens. We see the ending fight scene where Gray confronts Fisk, and it starts out green and black, like green lighting, bluish green lighting, and in silhouette. And as the scene progresses, it starts shifting, it starts pulsing between green and blue. And then as soon as he says, "You were the job, your wife was just an additional paycheck," red comes into the scene, and the lighting is going back and forth between blue and red and green the whole time. And then later on, when we get back into Aaron's underground at the end of the film, it's all red and blue again as Gray / STEM is walking in and shooting the guards and all that kind of stuff. The plants are red now. They weren't red before. All the lighting's blue. The grid, the vertical grid lighting is all red where it used to be gold. Like, it's all red and blue until Gray's on board. He's like, "This guy killed my wife. I want to get him." And then when the detective comes in and they start going back and forth, and he starts finding out that STEM was behind it all, the light is pulsing back and forth between red and blue and gold and blue, orange and blue, red and blue, orange and blue, red and blue. And it stays that way up until the very end, when STEM, in control of the body, is walking out and it's all red. It's like peak visual filmmaking, not necessarily in shot blocking and positioning and all that kind of stuff, but the color language is telling you everything you need to know about what each scene means.
Yeah, it is like coding.
Yes.
Like color coding. And if you're unlocking the pattern and it continues to hold up through the film, that is pretty interesting.
And it wasn't like one else said he wanted to color code every environment they went to. That's part of the film language. So there's a lot of thought behind it.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty thorough. But a lot of filmmakers pay attention to that, and for good reason. That's why branding. You have different brand colors, and what they're doing is they're branding feelings and sentiments and atmosphere in the story with their own brand colors. And apparently this guy was all over it.
and leaning into that as well with the same idea of the virtual world is a lot less painful than the real one.
Mm-hmm.
The only world without that harsh, deep shadowing all over the place. The only shots where we see like naturalistic color and lighting are when Gray is seeing Asha in the virtual projection.
Oh, in the fake hospital where he wakes up and everything's fine.
And every time, well, not just that, but there's also the scene where she's like, I printed a pizza, right? And he's in bed and he wakes up with her hand on his arm. That same color.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Like, those are the only places where we see that natural lighting.
Yeah, like lush, luminance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very, very well done. Because
so what does that mean then? Because retrospectively,
that's the place
hold on. Retrospectively, STEM, I imagine, because at the end he says, I was just waiting for him to have a psychotic break. He had a break and now he's locked away. So he was likely feeding those images to him the entire film. Those were STEM created.
Yes, 100%. I gave him what he wanted, is what he says at the end.
Yes.
So
and they set that up because he even said, I'm trying to find the off switch, because he never really could cope with the loss of his wife. Mm-hmm. So he's like, I gave him what he wanted. And it's like, yeah, that's what he wanted. So
what does that say regarding the color theory with the naturalistic lighting and the naturalistic coloring in those STEM created visions?
It's not harsh. It's not harsh anymore. You don't have the sharp black and white divide.
Yeah, it's like heavenly. It's white.
It's heavenly. It doesn't hurt.
It's like being in the cloud.
Virtual reality, right?
Yeah.
Which we had seen earlier in the film.
It's a lot less painful.
It's what they want. It's a lot less painful. Exactly. And so they kind of, they definitely telegraphed that moving forward. And I think that, circling back to the theme, it speaks strongly to the theme, because virtual reality, if you are too engrossed in your technology, it can be said that it controls you, right? How many people's digital planners control their every waking moment, right?
Yep.
You have to be here, you have to go there, you have to make this phone call. And I think that because of things like this, it speaks very strongly to its theme. And because it speaks so strongly to its theme, that's usually, like, I can forgive a lot if it's a clearly communicated theme that is successfully executed on. Just
which I believe this personally. I believe this film does. I know that.
No, I agree.
I know that Doug has a hard. I know that Doug has a hard out, and so I want to kind of wrap up my observation. I've really dominated this, but I want to wrap up with something that
you suggested the movie. I was fully planned for you to bring us in here and teach us about this movie. So I'm very, very happy for you taking the wheel and driving. So thank you.
Then I'll leave my insights. There's more I could say. I could probably go on for another hour, but I'll leave my insights as something that one else said about why he made the film in one of his interviews. He said that humans aren't really great with balance. If we could somehow take advantage of the amazing things about tech, but also police our own instincts without giving everything of ourselves to it, would be good. But that'll be hard because it's up to us individually, and we are addictive creatures. Humans are addictive. And
and we
have something that's very tough to give it up.
We seek convenience and comfort, not, we don't seek a way for us to
seek the easy way out.
Work more satisfactorily and satisfyingly. We look for ways to not have to work.
We look for the easy way out.
Yes. Yeah.
So
hold on, I'm looking to see if they're going to do a sequel here.
It's been
Upgrade 2 hasn't happened yet.
It's been 8 years. What? 8 or 10?
Yeah, it's been a while. But apparently there is some movement on a possible TV series.
Television series, yes. They're looking at
a TV series would be good. I don't know if I need another movie. I don't think I need another movie.
But totally a TV series with STEM in Gray's body,
that could be
navigating the world, that would be very interesting.
Like an episodic.
Well, you could slow it down.
That could be good.
Yeah, you could slow it down. You don't have to be trapped in an immediate plot lines where everything has to get resolved immediately, like they kind of found themselves in this one.
It could be like The Storyteller, where it's just a bunch of different stories that take place in the same world, maybe through the perspective of like a unified STEM persona. That would kind of be cool too. But now I'm writing the show for them, and I'm sure their ideas are better than mine.
Also,
well, you never know these days, man. Some of the most creative people might be outside the system.
That's true.
If you're not,
but also keep in mind that when he made the film, Wanell didn't say he was thinking about like a unified science fiction universe, but The Invisible Man is set in the same universe because the company that the girl's husband who had the invisible suit founded is Cobalt. Which
really?
Which is what Asha.
It is Cobalt.
Asha worked for Cobalt and made all the prosthetics and all the military technology. There you go.
So yeah, well, she said that they help wounded warriors essentially with lost limbs. It's like
right.
That's not really what you're doing.
With guns and arms, I don't think so.
Yeah.
With nanobot murder machines, I don't think so.
There's a lot of cute stuff in the film. Like the guy's name is Gray, as in gray matter, because he's stuck in his head, right? He doesn't have a body. Like there's a whole bunch of cute stuff like that in the movie that I thought was nice. The ending was so. It
kicks you in the teeth.
Suddenly bleak. It was so suddenly bleak.
Yeah, right? Man.
It was like, okay, you're dead. I'm locking you behind your own brain. I'm out. Peace. It was like, whoa, like all within the span of, I think it happened within like 10 or 15 minutes that all of that just happened. It was probably even more rapid than that.
Well, actually, more time. The twist was more like within 60 to 120 seconds. It was like, okay, he's defeating the villain. Then it's like, wait a minute. Oh, so he's controlling it. And while you're putting it together, the hero is locked away. The theoretical villain was actually a victim and he's knocked out and STEM wins. And it's like, well, checkmate for us. What?
But again, even more bleak than that is once you really think about it, STEM already won as soon as he was planted into Gray. Everything else was a cleanup operation.
Yeah. Everything else
was the sense that he had to lure him.
Yeah, no, but he was baby stepping Gray through the process he had already worked out in order to make it sure that he could not be stopped, right? Like,
and then
it's just
the last thing he does before he walks forward toward the camera is he tastes the blood on his finger, which Gray does in the beginning when he cuts himself.
Right, 100%.
I view that as kind of like a test to make sure that he was in control of everything because he didn't have access to any of the functions of the head while Gray was still present. So
because
this is to see that he can taste, and then he smiles and he walks toward the camera. Which
at this point, he now has access to the actual senses of the head, which he never did before.
Right.
That's what I got out of it.
That's what it's very, very subtle, easy to miss. But I've watched the film like 6 times. So like he says, hold this. Like he does the dot matrix printer thing with the
pencil
with the pencil and does the barcode, and then he says, hold it up in front of your eye. Well, why would he do that if he could just see and sense and feel whatever Gray is doing? He obviously can't. So he's able to control the body and dot matrix print out the barcode, but in order to read it, he has to have the guy physically hold it up in front of his face so he can read it. Yeah. And then not only
that it's in his head, he can interpret the information that's there and the different, the firing of the synapses, but and he
also
can't do anything before that.
And also symbolically, you had Gray cut himself and he tasted his own blood and sucked it off his finger before he got into the driver's seat of the car. And then at the end, as soon as Gray is out of the driver's seat, his body tastes the blood.
I like that. I like that driver's seat. That's great. Yeah, that's awesome.
So, it's a great film. I love it.
I'll tell you what. carry on. If you guys keep talking about this and it goes on, I will listen to the full stream on my own just to hear what else you have to say about it. But it was definitely a good movie, and I think Bacon will agree with me. It's one that I'll have to see a second time at a minimum.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch it a second time. I'm probably going to take better notes now that I have had, the class professor. Professor taught a class on Upgrade. I think that I was definitely leaning more towards liking the movie. I did like the movie. I can say that with confidence. I liked the movie.
Yeah.
I think that it spoke to its theme effectively. But I think now noticing those details throughout the film, it will really heighten my enjoyment of the second viewing.
Mhm.
So I'm very happy to do that. Doug, I don't think we're going to continue. We'll just end here. We'll end
no
here.
worries. I'll just say this: because of the twist ending, it actually threw out all of what I thought were cliches or formulas. I realized that because I was writing it down, I was like, "That's kind of formulaic." I knew he was the bad guy.
I was doing the same thing. I was like sitting here going, "Why is Sable Phoenix? Why is he so excited about this movie? There's got to be more to it. There's got to be more to it." And then there was that double twist. And I was like, "All right,
yeah." That's what I'm saying. That I looked at my notes as I was thinking about what I was going to say. I was like, "Actually, I can't bitch about that anymore. That's actually not true. If STEM was in charge of this plot, this doesn't work anymore." So there was a couple things that I had to throw out the window.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, some of the other criticisms that I had, I almost didn't want to even get too nitpicky because it was a $3 million budget. The fact that like swarms of police cars weren't showing up. Now, I'm not mad at that because actually on a $3 million budget, what we got was phenomenal. So it's actually praiseworthy in areas that I was willing to be critical at first.
Terminator.
So I completely agree with you. And ending on one final note, the entire theme of the film was, it was relying too heavily on technology and how that can undermine you, right? And what does it say about us as the audience that we were more willing to trust STEM than Aaron?
You're right.
The whole way through the movie. The whole way through the movie.
Great point.
We're more willing to trust STEM than this guy that we know is probably the bad guy, right? And I think that that's taking a step back and viewing, looking at how I viewed the film. I think it's a very effective carrying of that message because that's almost the story that they were crafting, but it's also the audience experience that was pulled out of that story.
They even had the blonde Aryan like super scientist.
Yep.
I was like,
he shows up in Gray's hospital room after he tries and tries to overdose himself. Mm-hmm. He shows up in Gray's hospital room in a black long coat and gloves and a mask. I mean, come on. He looks like an Undertaker.
More machine than man. Well, not really. Don't take it that far.
Well, guys, I got to go, but this was totally worth it. It's fun watching some new films like this and kind of digging into them a little bit.
I agree. And I'm grateful to Sable. Yeah. Thank you so much for suggesting it. Thank you for sitting down and having a conversation. Doug, thank you so much for being here, having this conversation as always.
For sure.
And I guess we'll see you all later. Thank you so much, chat. Thanks for people who were here, participated here and lurking, and people who are going to watch it later. I appreciate all of you. And thank you all. And we'll talk to you soon.
Have a good night, everyone.